The afternoon sun hung low and hot over the quiet suburban streets of Riverton, with a hum of lawnmowers mixed with the chirp of cicadas, and a few kids pedaled their bikes in lazy loops, and 16-year-old Ethan Parker trudged along the sidewalk with his backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds dangling from his neck after his phone died halfway through his playlist, his thoughts more on homework and whether he could talk his mom into ordering pizza than anything else. He was 3 blocks from home, his sneakers scuffing against the pavement, when the sharp growl of tires made him glance back just in time to see a black SUV with flashing yellow lights swerve up beside him, the doors opening before he even fully stopped, and 2 broad men in matching black uniforms stamped with cheap-looking patches that read HOA Police stepped out, blocking his path with the swagger of men who loved the performance of authority more than its responsibility. "Where are you going, kid?" The taller one barked, his eyes sweeping Ethan from head to toe like a scanner. "This is Lakeside Meadows property. Residents only." Ethan froze, confusion rushing over him. He said, pointing to the next cul-de-sac, "I live here. That's my house down the street." The shorter man snorted, reaching for the radio clipped to his shoulder, its static hiss more theater than function. "Sure you do. We've had reports of trespassers. Teens cutting through yards, vandalism. You meet the criteria." Ethan blinked, his throat tightening. What description? But before he could answer himself, the taller one stepped forward, grabbed his backpack strap, and yanked it down, rifling through the contents with the self-appointed confidence of a cop who knew no rules. "Hey!" Ethan protested, reaching out, but his wrists were suddenly twisted behind his back, cold steel biting into his skin with a snap that felt louder than cicadas, louder than the kids' laughter drifting from a few doors down. And just like that, Ethan was in handcuffs in broad daylight, standing on the same street where he had ridden his bike since he was 8. A dog barked. Curtains twitched. Across the street, Mrs. Alvarez, an elderly neighbor who never missed a thing, stepped out onto her porch, her phone already in her hand, muttering to herself, "Those uniforms don't look right," as she hit record. The fake cops, Mark and Dale, though Ethan didn't know their names yet, marched him toward the SUV, their voices booming as they told him he was under HOA arrest for trespassing and that juvenile offenders don't get second chances. Phrases so absurd that even the kids on bikes stopped to stare, wide-eyed, whispering. With the sun's heat pressing down on his bent neck, Ethan's heart pounded with humiliation and fear, but beneath the panic was a calmer thought of Rachel Parker, his mother, and the advice she had always given him. If anyone ever tries to intimidate you, stay calm, stay observant, and remember everything, because the truth will always have its day. So he kept his mouth shut as Mark shoved his head down to avoid hitting the SUV's doorframe, ignoring the jeers about punks these days, ignoring the sting of the cuffs, ignoring the burr in his chest that made him want to shout to the whole neighborhood that he belonged here more than these men ever could. And then, just as Dale reached for the back door handle, the screech of tires cut to the suburban hum again, and a silver sedan pulled to a stop so fast it riled the air. The driver's door flew open, and out strode Rachel Parker in her navy blazer and heels, her red hair catching the sunlight, her face set in a mask of fury so sharp that even the fake cops paused. She stepped forward, pulled something from her pocket, and held it high, her words ringing like a verdict. "Uncuff him," her voice slicing the street into silence. Every neighbor, child, and barking dog fell silent. Now, the moment Rachel Parker's voice cut through the street, the 2 self-appointed HOA cops froze just long enough for the gathered neighbors to sense a shift, a subtle but seismic change in the balance of power. Yet Mark, the taller one with the booming voice, quickly shook off the hesitation, puffing out his chest as if doubling down could cover the cracks forming in his act. "Ma'am, step back," he barked, one hand still gripping Ethan's arm, the other hovering over the fake, holster strapped to his hip. "This is official HOA business. Your kid was trespassing where he doesn't belong." And the words rang hollow but loud enough that a few of the more timid neighbors frowned as though maybe there was a chance this was legitimate. Rachel, however, didn't blink, didn't falter, didn't even glance at the cluster of faces peeking from porches. Her eyes locked squarely on the cheap steel cuffs cutting into her son's wrists, on the redness blooming around his skin, and in that stillness burned the cold, exacting fury of a mother who was also the district attorney A woman who had dismantled criminals on witness stands and torn apart entire gangs with airtight indictments. And yet, in this moment, all of that training, all of that courtroom composure, was braided with something far more primal: the instinct to protect her child. "Take your hands off my son," she said again. Each word landed like a gavel strike. But Dale, the shorter one with jittery eyes, tried to laugh it off, his voice shaky with bravado that didn't quite reach his throat. "Lady, you don't understand. We've had reports." He looked suspicious. "We're authorized. Authorized by who?" Rachel snapped, her tone a whip that cracked the air. "Because unless you can show me a statute that deputized a Lakeside Meadows HOA into a law enforcement agency, what I'm looking at is unlawful detainment, false imprisonment, and impersonation of an officer. Felonies, gentlemen, punishable by prison time." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Mrs." Alvarez's phone shook as she zoomed in, whispering, "Get him, Rachel," under her breath. Ethan, his face red with both humiliation and relief, lifted his chin as best he could with Mark's grip still on his shoulder, catching his mother's eye for half a second and seeing in her expression the same unshakable promise she'd made since he was small. "I will always fight for you." Mark, unwilling to surrender his stage, yanked Ethan a little closer, trying to intimidate by force, but the move only made the neighbors gasp, and Rachel took a deliberate step forward, pulling from her blazer a leather badge case that gleamed in the afternoon sun, flipping it open with a practiced snap, the gold seal of the district attorney's office catching the light like a mirror of truth. "I am District Attorney Rachel Parker," she announced, her voice carrying across the entire block. "And you are to uncuff my son before you add resisting arrest charges to the list of crimes you're committing right now." The words hit like thunder. Even Officer Jennings, the real cop who had just arrived in a marked cruiser summoned by frantic 911 calls, slowed as he stepped out, eyebrows shooting up at the sight of Ethan cuffed by men in uniforms that clearly weren't regulation, his gaze flicking between Rachel's badge and the absurd HOA patches stitched on a cheap nylon. "What the hell is going on?" Jennings demanded, but Rachel didn't give Mark or Dale a chance to spin another lie. She gestured sharply, her voice crisp and exacting, rattling off the charges like bullets. 2 count of impersonating law enforcement under Penal Code 538D, 1 count of false imprisonment under Penal Code 236, child endangerment assault. And if you don't uncuff him right now, I'll make sure resisting and obstruction are added when the uniforms you're pretending to be finally arrive to take you in. Dale's bravado cracked first, his hands twitching as if he might reach for the key, but Mark doubled down, shouting about protecting property values and keeping strangers out, his voice rising higher and thinner as the absurdity of his words collided with the very real badge Rachel held inches from his face. Now fully aware of what he was seeing, Jennings barked, "Release him now!" and the command layered atop Rachel's authority finally forced Mark's hand. The key scraped against the cuffs, the lock clicked, and Ethan's wrist came free, the marks glaring red against his pale skin. Rachel immediately pulled him into her arms, her blazer brushing his cheek, whispering fiercely, "You're safe now, baby," before turning back, eyes blazing, her voice once again cold steel. "Officers of the court will be notified. You, too, will not leave this street without real law enforcement putting you in cuffs." The neighbors erupted into chatter, some outraged, some stunned into silence, as Jennings moved quickly, demanding IDs from Mark and Dale, who stammered about acting under the HOA security policy, their fake authority crumbling with every second. "Mrs." Alvarez stepped off her porch, phone still recording, and shouted, "I got the whole thing." They grabbed him for nothing, like a couple thugs in Halloween costumes. The voices of others overlapping added, "They had no right. That poor boy." I knew those patches looked fake. And suddenly Karen-like certainty was drowned in a chorus of community outrage. Rachel, still holding Ethan close, looked around at every single witness and declared, "This is what happens when people pretend to be more powerful than they are. This is not protection. This is crime, and it ends tonight." Jennings, nodding grimly, radioed for backup, his voice clipped. "Send a unit for impersonating officers, false imprisonment, potential kidnapping attempt." The word kidnapping made several neighbors gasp audibly, the gravity of what nearly happened settling over them like a shroud. Ethan, rubbing his sore wrists, whispered, "Mom, They were going to put me in their truck. And Rachel's heart clenched, her fury sharpening into resolve as she kissed his forehead and whispered back, "Not anymore." And as the sirens wailed again in the distance, louder this time, bringing real uniforms and real authority, Mark and Dale shifted from swagger to stammer, their act collapsing entirely under the weight of Rachel Parker's badge, her fury, and the undeniable truth that they had picked the wrong kid on the wrong street, and the mother who would make sure their actions cost them everything. The first real patrol unit rolled up hot enough to rattle the magnolia leaves, and with it came the kind of silence that only follows a lie running out of road. Officer Jennings squared his shoulders as backup spilled onto the asphalt. 2 uniforms, a sergeant with clipboard, a community liaison already snapping evidence bags, and the instant the siren died, Rachel Parker's voice filled the space with cool, surgical certainty. Impersonation of an officer, false detention of a minor, color of authority kidnapping attempt. The entire neighborhood is witness. The sergeant looked at the plastic duty belt, the toy store holster, and the mismatched utility boots and said, flat as a judge reading calendar, "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Mark tried to regain the swagger that had vanished with the click of Ethan's cuffs opening by jabbing his thumb at the cheap HOA patch, as if embroidery could convert delusion into law. Dale flinched and blurted, "We were doing citizen's arrest," which earned him the kind of arched eyebrow that collapses bad arguments without wasting breath. Citizen's arrest doesn't give you the right to wear police insignia, carry cuffs, and shove a kid into an SUV, the sergeant said, signaling the junior officer to start photographs. Patches, handcuffs, the gaudy blinking amber light bar glued to the roof with crooked wiring visible, the interior were a milk crate crammed with zip ties, a nylon batten, and a stack of pre-printed HOA violation detained. Slips made a still life of pure vigilantism. Mrs. Alvarez inched closer, narrating for a video like a seasoned stringer. "Look at that. Zip ties, a batten, fake patches. Mijo. This is going straight to Channel 7. A neighbor kid, cheeks flushed, came skidding on a scooter and piped up that his drone had been filming the street when a black SUV jumped the curb. Within seconds, he had a tablet out, the screen replaying a smooth, nauseating arc. The fake cops cutting Ethan off, hands on him before a word was spoken. Jennings gave Rachel a quick glance before saying, "Ma'am, we'll seize the vehicle, collect every recording, and call a supervisor." Rachel no longer skeptical but annoyed. "And the chief," Rachel replied evenly, already thumbing her phone, "and the on-call judge." The sergeants had tipped at that. Respect recognition. This wasn't a showy DA grandstanding for crowd, but a prosecutor building chain of custody in real time. Bricks of proof stacking into a wall that would not fall. A neighbor had pulled the HOA's public filings and discovered that there was no security contract on record, no insurance rider, no approved vendor named Lakeside Protective Services, and only a line item labeled Neighborhood Watch Equipment, signed by an HOA vice president whose last name matched Dale's credit card receipt tucked in the SUV's console. The deeper twist and surface, not with a bang but with a whisper that spread like a "my brother's on the board." Dale blurted when the sergeant held up the receipt, panic untethering his mouth from sense. He said we could do this. He said the board would cover us if anything happened. The crowd murmured, heat turning into something colder, betrayal, and as if called by the accusation, 2 board members materialized at the corner in golf shirts in shock, whispering furiously that no vote had authorized uniforms. No one had approved handcuffs, and for God's sake, why did the equipment include a pair of cheap, illegal red and blue strobes wrapped in a towel under the driver's seat? Rachel's eyes flicked from the towel to the board members and back to the evidence tech, who was already bagging the bulbs. She didn't smile. She never smiled in a scene like this. But her voice gained a quiet weight. "Add prohibited emergency lighting to the list," she told the sergeant, who nodded, writing probable cause. "Vehicle search on his pad. Also seize that logbook," Rachel added, pointing to a spiral notebook jammed between the seats. The sergeant flipped it open and his face soured. Dates, times, descriptions like hoodie, dark skin, unknown, arrows to words like trespass watch and question at gate, a crude sketch of the cul-de-sac with arrows from school to Ethan's block. "That's profiling," someone breathed, and you could feel the block, this tidy, sprinkler-scented block. Understand that a rotten scaffold had been standing beside their mailboxes for months, unsupported by law but propped up by the comfortable illusion of safety. Just then, the HOA president herself bustled from a BMW with a face-to-color printer paper, calling, "There's been a misunderstanding. Likewise, we have policies." And Rachel, surely we can resolve this internally. The last word followed with a tinny clatter of a coin dropped in the wrong dish. Rachel turned, slowly, the way a storm pivots, and laid the badge case open against her palm, so the gold seal caught the evening sun. "Your policies are not law," she said, syllables clean as glass, "and your volunteers are not police. 2 men in counterfeit gear put my son in cuffs and tried to throw him into a car. This is not a board matter. It's a criminal case." The president's mouth opened, closed. The board members behind her took microscopic steps backward, suddenly fascinated by their shoelaces. The sergeant's radio crackled for him to stand by for the lieutenant. He said, "Copy," then eyed the fake cops one more time, voice gone dry. "Step apart. Hands behind your backs." There's a sound cuffs make when they're applied to men who believe they would only ever apply them to others. A hollow, disbelieving click, as though the metal itself is surprised. That sound rang twice. Mark regarded his wrists with the astonishment of an upside-down magician. Dale's lower lip shimmered. "You can't arrest us." Mark shouted, desperately trying an incantation that had worked on teenagers but failed on law. "We were protecting the neighborhood from a child walking home," the sergeant replied, not cruel, just accurate, while wearing fake police gear, while making plans for detentions with illegal lights, with a logbook that reads like a manual for harassment. Officer Jennings approached Rachel with something close to contrition. "Ma'am," he said, "I'll be recommending felony charges to the DA's office." A tiny hush fell. Even the cicadas seemed to pause at the irony. Rachel's gaze didn't waver. "I'll conflict out," she said immediately, and to the sergeant, "appoint a special prosecutor from the next county. I won't touch it except to testify." That was the second twist. Power choosing limits in public, and it didn't undercut her authority. It amplified it. She turned to Ethan, then touched the livid cuff marks on his wrist with a gentleness that made 3 neighbors swallow hard, and asked if he was dizzy, if he could breathe. "I'm okay," he said, voice quiet, a teenage boy publicly calibrating pride and relief. "Mrs." Alvarez sidled up and pressed her phone into Rachel's free hand. "I got every second," she whispered, "from when they screeched up to when you said, 'now.' And my Ring camera caught them circling the block earlier. I'll email them both," a mom 2 doors down added. "My husband's dash cam recorded them tailing kids from the school gate all week." Evidence had turned from a trickle to a flood. The community, which had murmured and watched and hedged, now hurled receipts like sandbags against a rising river. The sergeant had a hunch and called for a uniformed code enforcement officer to arrive as the impound truck hooked up to the fictitious patrol SUV. She circled the vehicle once or twice and then wrote a tidy stack of citations for unauthorized signage, unauthorized emergency lighting, and unlawful modification of a vehicle to resemble a police unit within the city limits. She said to no one in particular, tucking carbon copies beneath the windshield wiper while the truck winched a bumper. "But municipal code will chew you up when you try to cosplay cop. People think only state law matters," she said. Dale appeared to be crying as Mark watched helplessly as the cable tightened. "We were trying to help," he muttered, softer now. The scaffolding gone, just a man facing a sentence he'd built for himself. Rachel said the one thing that could not be misunderstood or softened. "You hurt my son." She then stared at him for a long time. After that, she turned away, wrapping Ethan in a one-armed embrace that showed the block what human justice looks like, calm, documented, and unflinching. The sergeant wrapped chain of custody tags around the logbook and the cuffs, barked for photographs of Ethan's wrists, and nodded to Jennings. "Get statements, start to finish," he said. "Tonight." The sun slipped lower, painting the street honey gold as real authority. The boring, necessary kind, ground forward like a machine built to fix exactly this species of harm. And when the lieutenant finally arrived to sign off on the arrests, he took one long look at the scene. Neighbors clustered supportive, a mother with a badge and a son with marks, 2 men in matching lies, and said the only word still needed, "Book 'em." When the tow truck rumbled away with the black SUV swinging from its chains like a broken prop, A kind of hush settled over the cul-de-sac. Not silence exactly, but a quieter, heavier hum of people recalibrating what they thought they knew. Neighbors shifting from curiosity to shame to relief as Officer Jennings and the sergeant finished bagging the last of the evidence, the fake cuffs, the notebooks, the ridiculous patches that now looked less official and more pathetic under clear plastic. And Rachel Parker, with Ethan pressed close to her side, finally allowed herself a breath that wasn't sharpened into steel, though the fury still simmered in her eyes as she gave her son water from her car and dabbed at the red welts of handcuffs had left. Ethan, voice low so only she could hear, muttered, "They were going to put me in the car, Mom." And Rachel hugged him tighter, whispering, "They'll never touch you again," before turning back to the officers, her day badge still glinting in her, hand like a warning flare. "Document everything," she ordered. Photographs of his wrists, witness statements, every second of that video footage secured. And the sergeant, recognizing not just a furious mother but a seasoned prosecutor, nodded sharply, promising the chain of custody would be airtight. "Mrs." Alvarez hurried up, her phone out in front of her as an altar of truth offering, and shouted, "I got the whole thing on video, start to finish." They grabbed him, cuffed him, tried to throw him in the car, and then you showed up like Wonder Woman, which drew a ripple of laughter to the crowd, thin but cathartic, because even in outrage there's room for relief. Neighbors who had at first muttered doubts now stepped forward with apologies, sheepishly admitting they had wondered if Ethan really belonged here, and Rachel, though her jaw was tight, accepted their words with a clipped "thank you," because she understood better than. Anyone that acknowledgement, even late, was part of justice. Within the hour, real police units had booked Mark and Dale on charges of impersonating law enforcement, false imprisonment, and attempted kidnapping. The logbook and fake equipment entered into evidence, and Rachel filed an emergency motion to have them held without bail until arraignment, her legal mind already spinning through statutes as she held her son's hand. And when they stood before Judge Ellison the next morning, the courtroom smelled faintly of coffee and paper as the prosecutor from the next county overlaid out the charges in crisp detail, playing Alvarez's video for the record. The judge's lips pressed into a thin line as he watched Ethan shoved against the SUV in grainy sunlight, and when it ended, he turned to defendants with scorn that cut deeper than any gavel, declaring, "This is an outrageous abuse of trust, a vigilante fantasy that could have ended in tragedy. You are not law enforcement. You are criminals, and this court will treat you as such." The sentence, 18 months for impersonation, 18 more for false imprisonment, stacked with probation for the other charges, landed like a thunderclap, and the HOA board, humiliated by the exposure, passed emergency bylaws within the week banning any use of uniforms, vehicles, or titles that suggested police authority, a victory Rachel did not gloat over, but noted with cold satisfaction when she addressed the board directly at the next meeting. Community safety is not cosplay, and it is not harassment. Safety is knowing your neighbors by name, not by suspicion. The applause that followed was genuine, if awkward, and for Ethan it meant more than the sentencing. The sight of the people who had once looked at him sideways now nodding, clapping, saying, "We see you, we were wrong." In the days that followed, he walked home again with his head a little higher, no longer ducking his shoulders, the marks on his wrists fading, but the memory carved into him in a way that would always sting. And Rachel, though she wanted to wrap him in cotton and guard him forever, instead gave him space, teaching him the harder truth, that justice isn't about erasing harm, but about answering it so loudly it can't pretend to be invisible. The story spread beyond their block. Local news led with Alvarez's footage. Headlines read, "Fake HOA police arrest teen. District attorney mom intervenes." And by the weekend, Rachel was invited onto a panel about community policing, where she told the cameras the same thing she told the board. When people try to make themselves bigger by dressing like authority, what they really do is shrink the community they claim to protect. My job as a prosecutor is to make sure lies and uniforms never get to decide who belongs. And back in Lakeside Meadows, under the soft glow of porch lights and the whir of sprinklers, neighbors began to knock on doors with casseroles and apology cookies. Ethan's classmate high-fived him at school for having the coolest mom ever, and Mrs. Alvarez, who had become something of a hero herself, winked whenever she saw him, tapping her phone and saying, "Don't worry, Mijo, I'm still recording." One night, sitting on the porch swing, Ethan asked softly, Mom, are they gone for good? And Rachel, staring out at the quiet street that almost swallowed him, said, they're gone. But more important, you're still here. And now they know this block has a DA on it. They'll think twice before they ever try again. And if this story had to end in one line for the world to remember, it would be the truth spoken with her steady voice over the hum of cicadas and the soft creak of the swing. They thought they could handcuff my son with fake authority, but all they really did was chain themselves to the law.